Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.
I want to understand what was your time like at SP Jain on campus. Was that your first time in Bombay?
It was. It was my first time in Bombay. It was my first time in a hostel.
Okay.
I did my undergrad in visual communications and I was at home, so completely kept away from,
The
living
hostel
outside of
life.
home the first
Yeah.
time, any of that. So yes, I think SP Jain was a great experience. I have some of my best friends are from campus, as would be the case with most people. In fact, given Bangalore and Bangalore traffic, I stayed over at a friend's place, and she's a really good friend of mine from
Right.
campus, who lives closer to here versus where I live. But I think the piece that really stuck out for me in SP Jain, and which makes me talk a lot about campus till date, is just it's a campus which has a lot of diversity, and it's a campus where even back then they were making you write SOPs. Like I don't think anyone in 2006 was asking for SOPs to get into a B school.
Right.
SP Jain used to do it back then. And they had a very different interview process as well, all of which meant that you had a class of people who came from all kinds of backgrounds. So while, of course, the bulk always is people who've done engineering and some CAs, they had people like me. So I had a communications background. I've had classmates who went to hotel management, batchmates who came from chemistry. And then it also had a lot of these interesting clubs and things that you did where you could pursue what you liked. And SP Jain I actually wrote CAT, by the way, because I wanted to go to MICA.
You wrote CAT to go to
I
MICA?
wrote CAT to go to MICA. True story, because I wanted to go to advertising. And
yeah,
then,
because you're from a communications background.
yes,
right?
and then SP Jain happened. And I was still stuck on media. And I don't think in any of the other campuses, media was as big as back then. But SP Jain actually had people. So I think in 2006, someone who passed out, who incidentally is also another author.
Right.
We have a lot of people from SP Jain who went to HT Media who've written books. In addition to other people from HT who've written books like yourself, Kunj. I don't know what it is about the water over there. But so Isaac John, who was, I think, the first person to think about media, and he was class of 2006.
Right.
And he called HT on campus. And then someone went from the class of 2007. I went from the class of 2008. I don't think in any other campus I would have been able to find alums, find people who'd done media, who'd done something different and would be able to tell me about it. So that's entirely from SP.
And you got into media after SP
Yes.
Jain, and you felt that there was something lacking in terms of your career trajectory, and as in, I'm making this assumption,
Sure.
you can clarify. And then you decided to do a second degree, and you went to UCB, University of California Berkeley, for a second degree. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey? Because I'm pretty sure, how many of you here think that this is the last bit of education that you guys are going to get, formal education? Yeah, so what happened, or I don't know what your thought process was at that time as well. After SP Jain, did you think that you're someone who's going to get another degree or get more formal education later on? What was that transition like?
So I'll be very honest, right? I went to SP Jain right out of undergrad, which is very
You were a
rare.
fresher
I was a
into
fresher,
SP
which is quite rare for SP because it mostly has people with work ex. But having said that, I was a fresher. I was a fresher out of a 3-year undergrad program. And I landed up there because I wanted to do something in an ad agency, and I knew that my undergrad degree was going to get me a salary of 6,000 rupees a month, and there was no way I could survive on that. It was as simple as that. I didn't know what I was doing. This was an easy thing. It made sense to do it. And that's how I landed up there. And the only thing I was clear about is media mein jana hai. Didn't know what that would mean. I just had this grand vision of media company and something to do with journalism, because
Right.
in undergrad I wanted to become a journalist, but then moved up, left that thought behind. I went there and they started out by putting me in this online business. I really liked what I was doing, and they didn't know, right? I mean, if I had gone to Google in 2008 and said, hey, I want to be a product manager, they would have laughed in my face. They wouldn't have hired me.
You didn't have the right profile for
I
it.
didn't have the profile at all. No engineering background, don't know what I'm doing. That way, HT gave me that opportunity, right? They just let us be PMs at the time. And I learned about product management while I was there. I worked with the tech team. I worked with the design team. I built products there. And when I was doing this, I realized that there was this thing called UX. And I know someone before me was also talking about this, where she had a similar thing, where she said, there's this thing called UX, there's this thing called design. Nobody's really talking about
Right.
it. And in 2011, I was basically at this point where I was product head, and I was thinking of my next career move. And most of my colleagues from HT who were moving at the time, including a good friend of mine who I'm now married to incidentally, they're all gone to these e-commerce startups, right? So we had a bunch of people who went to firstcry.com, which was just starting up at the time.
Right.
And I was like, okay, if I have to go somewhere next, I'm going to have to go to a startup. And I really wanted to be like a product head there also. So I said, okay, if I have to do this, what do I need? And I'm never going to be an engineer, right? I'm not going to go back and become an engineer. I said, my strong point was that I was really good with, customer journeys, with making wireframes, with trying to visualize what people should see and how they will use the product. And I heard about UX. Luckily for me, I had a cousin who actually is a UX designer. She incidentally went to UC Berkeley. So I sent her an email one fine day saying, what is this UX thing? I want to know about it. And then she sent me a bunch of online resources that I read. I used for stuff that I was building in HT at the time. And then I just one fine day said, I want to learn more. I looked up certifications in India. I think IITs used to still have a master's in HCI and you could go do it.
Right.
Unfortunately, they expected you to be an engineering grad. I don't know why. I'm very miffed at them, still miffed about it. And I said, okay, so there's nowhere in India I can do this. And I said, you know what? Let me apply and see if someone will let me in. And I made a portfolio. I put together my work ex. I wrote those SOPs, did all of that. And I think unlike the previous person, I was very open to going and studying again. I said, I've worked really hard for 4 years. My last year was after a relaunch. So I basically spent 1 year where we were living at the office, going home just to take a shower, done all of that. So I was at that space where I was like, college is a
Campus
nice
will be
break.
fun. Yeah.
Campus is a nice break. Jayenge, like 4 days of work, that's all. It'll be fun. So I applied and I got through, which was good. And then, it was still agonizing. I'd also considered other job opportunities. At the time that I was leaving, I'd just been promoted. So I thought about it. I was like, I could continue. This is comfortable. I'll probably get what I want just by jumping jobs. But I really wanted to study at that point. So I said, let's go.
So there was no agenda that, okay, if I want to get into an Amazon or a Google of the world, this is not going to be enough.
To be honest, at that point, I thought I will go and become a full-fledged UX designer. I was like, I will start from scratch again. I will become a designer. I will change my entire life, try something new. I'm bored of this product management stuff. And then 1 year into my master's degree, I was like, I like design, but I really like product. I want to go back and do product. So that's how I learned what I really liked.
Right.
So
how is the US B school experience very quickly different from an Indian B school experience then?
I can't really say B school because I went to something called School of Information.
Information, yeah.
Which is a separate thing altogether. It's an interdisciplinary program. So they get people with management background, design background, journalism background. So they mix up a bunch of people and then they... the important piece is that they're training people for jobs in tech, right? So essentially the courses are very varied. There's everything from design-based courses. So I did courses on, I took every design course possible. So things like tangible interfaces, which is physical product building, so with circuits and what you would potentially do in an electronics class. So we had like Arduino boards and I've built stuff with that. I had data visualization classes, so things like Tableau, how do you visualize data, build those kinds of products. I even took a game design class just because it seemed like a fun thing to do.
It's a fun thing to do, yeah.
But there were also people, my batch had people who were also focusing in things like big data, machine learning. Like I have batchmates who are, data engineering scientists at this point.
Right.
So it was a very interesting experience because it was interdisciplinary to a very different level. But having said that, it's still all in and around the tech world. So they even make you take mandatory classes in things like information policy. So I do know tomorrow if I build something and somebody asks me about copyright, privacy.
About privacy.
Unfortunately, it's all US based. I can't use a lot of it in India, but I have a lot of knowledge about those things.
Okay. I wanted to understand a little bit more about how you look at product management. And with that in mind, I wanted to ask you, is there a product that you really admire? You wish that, man, I wish I was a brand manager. I was a product manager for this particular product. Do you have any products like that in your mind?
I did, and I went and worked on it because that was Kindle. I mean, it was something very close
that
to
was
my
Kindle
heart.
for you, yeah.
That was completely
Kindle is for me also. I'd become a product manager only because
you could work on it.
I could work on
See, the
Kindle.
good perks that you get is Amazon is otherwise not known for swag, but you can get into beta programs and get to test Kindles. Like I have 4 or 5 Kindles and I can keep testing. I have multiple accounts on them. So that's the side.
That's a fun thing
that's a side
to do.
perk on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I go beyond Kindle, I would still end up sticking to the reading space. So Goodreads was another thing that I was a big fan of.
Right.
Goodreads also incidentally is owned by Amazon. But they're just completely based out of the US. But I really like Goodreads, and I think there's a lot of things that Goodreads
What is it
could
that Goodreads does right? As in, what is it that you admire about Goodreads?
Personally, because I read a lot, I love Goodreads just for cataloging, right? Anytime think of a new book, I go add it to a want to read list. Then I use it to decide what to buy if I can't decide.
As a user, I understand.
Yeah.
As a product manager, what is it that you admire about Goodreads?
As a product manager, I think just the fact that, so even before Goodreads existed, right, there was something called Shelfari. I don't even know how many people remember it.
Yeah.
They had
people of our vintage will remember.
Will probably,
yes.
So I think there are many people who tried solving this problem, right? Many people who thought about this thing of, if I had to digitally catalog books, what do I put there? How do I make a product?
Right.
And none of them stuck. Like I started using Shelfari, I think I dropped off in a few weeks because all it did was shelf the books. Goodreads, I think the whole concept behind building the community around it, at least initially when gaming was a rage, I don't know if anyone still plays this, but I used to play their never-ending book quiz, for example. All of those sort of like additional things that they added in, as a product manager, I was like, this is fantastic. So even something as, like, I think they did this more recently, but their app, right? You fire up that app, it's a little slow loading, but they've thought of how to make that experience also enjoyable, because in that slow loading, you'll see they'll give you a book quote. And it's always interesting to read. You don't think of the fact that, hey, this app isn't just opening. You're like, there's a book quote. Oh, I'm reading this quote. Now my brain is like, have I read this book? Have I not read this book?
Correct.
I think those little touches make that a product that I would love to work on. And having said that, I also know that there are things that they don't do so well for India. Like their app is big, they're slow. They're not a product built with India in mind at all.
Right.
So if they ever thought of wanting to hire for PMs in India, I'll probably be one of those people who'll go up and say, hey, come hire me.
Now on to something else. How many of you have artistic interests, like wanted to become dancers, singers, at different points of times in your lives, you wanted to become artists of some sort?
Someone has like half a hand up. She's like, I'm almost scared to admit it over here.
No, nobody's going to not hire you because of that, because we've got no recruiters here. So, yeah. So the thing is that a lot of us, and let's face it, there is a pull of the money as well, where in terms of what decisions we make as far as our careers are concerned, and then we circle back to what we used to originally like to say that, okay, now that this part of my career is sorted and I'm making decent amount of money and I'm like, my parents don't look down on me thinking I'm a failure, maybe I can try something that I was always passionate about. And you've taken that direction and you've managed to write a book. And what has that journey been like? I also want to know how your professional life, your core professional career as a product manager, working in big companies, how has that helped you manage a project, or put together a book that can get published and that can possibly do well commercially? Because I feel that these are connected, so I would want to know how you look at it.
Yeah, I think they're definitely connected. So just going back to the first part of your question, right?
Yeah.
I think, I don't think that I really had this thing from childhood saying, oh, I want to write a book or any such. I've just always liked things like doodling or writing on the side, right? And even with writing, I was one of those people who early on said, oh, I will never write a book. I just read them. I don't want to write them. I didn't have that thought. In fact, even as recently as like 2-3 years ago, if you would ask me, I said, no, not writing a book. But it so happened that I got this brilliant idea. So it was a little bit of a roundabout thing again. I had this vague idea at one point where I was like, if I could, I want to illustrate a children's book. But I'll be honest, my doodling skills are nowhere close to being good enough to illustrate a children's book, because that's a very demanding level of illustrating. But I was generally like, reading doing a few things here and there. And one fine day I just had this thought where I went for a children's book writing workshop. I wrote a story there. And I really liked the story. I was trying to get that to publishers. And in the interim, what had happened is that my husband was on this random quest where he went around eating bizarre species from around the world. And I kept joking and saying, this would make a brilliant book. And he never did anything about it. So one fine day I said, I'm going to write about it and we'll see what happens. And that's how the whole thing really started.
Right.
So I put it together. I went through, pitched it to a few publishers. Penguin got interested. And then that's how it sort of evolved and became a book. It's called Dare Eat That, and it has
Eat That.
Yes, over 100+ species of whatever Vivek's eaten from around the world. Very sort of travel guide. If you like traveling, if you like food, if you just like interesting travel stories, it's something worth picking up. I can actually even show it to you. This is what it looks like. But I think the part that really worked from my regular job is, I'm very good with deadlines. B, I'm very good with planning stuff, right?
Yeah, just managing a project
Managing
of
projects.
that complexity.
The complexity, and also with writing. I mean, Amazon, as anyone would know, is the company that makes you write, right? Everything in Amazon is done with a doc.
If you could talk a little bit more about that as well, because I'm not sure if everybody's aware here that Amazon, everything you have to write down.
Pretty much. So Amazon has this concept called the 6-pager. For any big idea that you have, you can't just go and do it upfront to get people excited, to get people to work on the idea. You write a PR FAQ. So you put together a press release of if you had to write a PR for what this thing should look like, you first write that PR and then you write a bunch of FAQs or the frequently asked questions around it, like what is this going to do, what problem are you solving, and so on. And actually, if you look it up online, you'll find many examples. A lot of people have actually talked about it in detail. They've put in a lot of examples. So it's impossible to be in Amazon without writing. Like there is nothing that you can't go into a meeting without a document, because the meeting will start with people reading what you've written and then people start talking. So there's time blocked off in a meeting to read before you actually start discussing things. So
that's something that helped you in the...
That definitely did, because I've had years of having people critique my writing.
Right.
While they were critiquing it in a different space, it worked. I've also had colleagues who've read my book come back saying, it's very nice. You've put in things like tables to tell us prices. You've put in like these charts. It's very convenient. It's like Amazon, easy to digest. I don't think I'd have thought of those things, frankly, if it wasn't for my job. But even just planning, going back to things like timelines. I heard this from my editor at one point that, it's very interesting working with you, because if you say you'll give something back by Tuesday, you give it by Tuesday. Most authors take they take extra time.
And then the justification is that I'm an artist. And
some such, right?
Something like that, yeah.
And I didn't know till then that I was making their life that easy. They were like, oh, this is awesome.
Right.
We just tell you, turn it around in 1 week, you do it in 1 week. And I said, yeah, but isn't that how the world works? And apparently not. So I think all of those really helped. And just even this whole thing of thinking through the idea, right? I initially pitched the idea of a book at Bangalore Lit Fest because they had a contest. And for pitching the book, they said you have 3 minutes and you can come, and 20 people got selected based on a synopsis and one chapter that you wrote.
So it was like a contest for
It was
Penguin.
a contest. So not Penguin. It was a Bangalore Lit Fest contest. Penguin wasn't even there, by the way.
Okay.
There were other publishers there. They said, come and pitch. Everybody gets 3 minutes. Do what you want in the 3 minutes. And most of the other people who came to pitch, right, you could see they were either reading what they had written or they were just sort of vaguely trying to say, this is what's in my head. But I was like, boss, if I'm pitching, I'm pitching. So I had like 3 minutes. I thought through what I was going to say. So I had like one story which I'd narrated, and then I had like this handout which I gave people where I'd fake made a cover, put like a list of chapters and said, this is what the book will be, and so on. And I think that worked because somebody else saw that pitch and they took that thing, said, send me this on email. And that's how I got connected to Penguin. So I would have never done that if it wasn't for being who I am, for having the background of being in product, being in corporate, for all of that, right? So it worked out to my advantage completely.